These are the headlines we're following at this hour. The Yoon administration is proposing a budget for next year worth some $495 billion. It's the smallest on-year increase in 2 decades, but more spending is promised for the socially vulnerable. The number of births in South Korea once again drops in June, bringing down the fertility rate in the second quarter to a record 0.7 per woman, and continuing the natural decline in the overall population for nearly 4 years. Following the start of Japan's release of Fukushima wastewater, South Korea is conducting an intensive inspection into seafood's origin mark. China has banned all Japanese seafood, prompting a potential trade dispute with Japan. Good afternoon. The Yoon administration has proposed next year's budget worth some $495 billion. That keeps the annual increase at the lowest level in nearly 2 decades amid a decline in tax revenue. But the proposal promises more spending for the socially vulnerable. Our Shin-Young breaks it down for us.
The government's budget proposal for 2024 was revealed following a cabinet meeting on Tuesday. For this year's budget, the Yoon administration focused on building a solid foundation for physical soundness. While continuing with this theme for next year's budget as well, it has also focused on improving the country's financial structure.
우리 정부는 경제 체질을 시장 중심 민간 주도로 바꿔 민간이 더 활발하게 투자하고 지출하고 일자리를 만들어내는데 역점을 둘 것입니다. 이를 위해 민간 투자를 저해하는 킬러 규제를 과감하게 철폐하고 민간의 자금이 흘러갈 수 있도록 금융 시스템을 정비할 것입니다.
In order to do so, South Korea will continue to tighten its belt. The government proposed a budget for next year of 656.9 trillion Korean won, or around $495 billion at the current rate. It's an increase of 2.8% from this year's budget, the smallest on-year increase since top-down budgeting was first introduced in 2005. Also, the government has gone through major spending reforms in order to secure an extra $17 billion of funds for use in the budget. The centerpiece of the bill is some $14.6 billion allocated to bolster the welfare system for the socially vulnerable. This includes increasing the maximum basic living allowance for low-income families to approximately $1,400 per month. That's $160 more compared to this year and more than the total increase implemented by the previous administration. As a response to the aging society issue, the government has increased the number of jobs for seniors to 1 million, which is approximately 10% of the elderly population and marks a record high increase of 147,000. It has also increased senior employment allowances by 7%. Those allowances have been frozen since 2018. Tackling the country's low birth rate, parents with newborns will be eligible for up to 1 million won, or around $750 per month, in parental allowance beginning next year. Also, to achieve a balance between work and childcare, the period of paid childcare leave will be extended for the first time since 1995 from 12 months to 18 months. Next year's budget has also been designed to manage the increase in government debt by reducing expenditure growth.
Despite a decline in tax revenue, we mitigated the deterioration of the fiscal balance for the upcoming year by curbing the growth rate of total expenditure. We have also managed to control the increase in national debt, keeping it at its lowest level since 2019 at 61.8 trillion won, as part of efforts to establish a solid foundation for fiscal soundness.
With next year's budget, South Korea's budget deficit to GDP ratio is forecast to be at 1.9%, worsening by 1.3 percentage points from this year. The total national debt to GDP ratio is expected to be 51% next year, up 0.6 percentage points from this year. The government will submit the final bill to the National Assembly on September 1st, and the legal deadline for the National Assembly to pass the budget is December 2nd. Shin-Young, Arirang News.
The number of births in South Korea once again drops in June, bringing down the fertility rate in the second quarter to a record low 0.7 per woman. Now, South Korea has been seeing its overall population declining for nearly 4 years. Our Park Gun-woo has the details.
South Korea's population continues to fall. According to data by Statistics Korea on Wednesday, the country's population saw its 44th straight month of natural decrease ever since November 2019. Deaths have exceeded births. The total fertility rate in the second quarter was just 0.7, which is the lowest for any April to June period. The number of births in the second quarter fell to its lowest ever figure, dropping by 6.8% compared to the same period in 2022. This was the 30th quarter in a row that the number of births has fallen. The birth figures for June were also down 1.6% year-on-year. An official from Statistics Korea said this was mainly caused by the shrinking number of females aged 25 and 39, and as more people are staying single or getting married later. In fact, research from the agency on Monday showed only 1 out of 3 young adults think positively about marriage, and half of them answered that having children is unnecessary. The number of deaths increased 7.6% in June to over 26,000, which was the highest of any June since the data was first compiled in 1983. In terms of the second quarter of this year, there were 8% fewer deaths due to the base effects of COVID-19 in the second quarter of last year. Marriages in June increased 7.8% on year, while divorces were also up 2.7%. Park Geonu, Arirang News.
President Yoon emphasized the government's commitment to back up its startup ecosystem led by the private sector, while underscoring the need for companies to aim for the global market. On Wednesday, President Yoon invited 110 startup founders, investors, and relevant government officials to discuss how to bolster the startup scene in the country. Lee Young, Minister of SMEs and Startups, also gave a briefing on the Startup Korea strategy, which includes helping companies expand their reach overseas, create global startup hubs, and boost private venture investment. According to the top office, the participants agreed on a need for a global expansion and inflow of ventures and startups, as well as the creation of a business ecosystem where large corporations and startups can coexist and collaborate. Since Japan started releasing wastewater from the destroyed Fukushima nuclear power plant last week, South Korea's intensive 100-day inspection into seafood is in full swing. Authorities are checking country of origin to ensure public trust and minimize damage to the local industry. Our Shin Se-byuk reports.
Japan's release of Fukushima wastewater is sparking concerns among South Korean fishmongers. Though yet to see a major hit in sales, there is a growing worry that fish markets will become financial victims over fears that consumers will turn their backs on seafood products.
There's this concern about whether the seafood is actually safe. It's like, can we really eat it without any worries?
To dispel public safety concerns, the government is stepping up inspections of waters surrounding South Korea as well as seafood products.
We're carrying out thorough safety checks on both the seawater and fish.
Special inspections are also being carried out. On Monday, the government kicked off a 100-day intensive inspection to monitor the marking of the origin of seafood at some 20,000 stores. This is the second intensive inspection, which follows the first round of checks in May and June. Major seafood items to be inspected include scallops, sea breams, and sea squirts. Korean fishmongers rely on Japanese imports for these products. According to government data, South Korea imported 10,610 tons of seafood from Japan in the first half of 2023, which accounts for 2% of the total. Meanwhile, the government is coming up with measures to boost seafood consumption as it strives to ensure seafood safety. It plans to hold weekend festivals and sales events across the country as part of efforts to encourage people to buy more seafood products. Shin Se-byuk, Arirang News.
In the meantime, following the release of Fukushima wastewater, China has banned all Japanese seafood, prompting a potential trade dispute with Japan amid rising tensions. Beijing's decision to ban all its seafood imports from Japan has prompted Tokyo to threaten to take Beijing to the World Trade Organization in order to seek a reversal. Japan's Foreign Minister Yoshimasa Hayashi on Tuesday said that Japan will take necessary action under various routes, including the WTO framework. On the same day, Beijing's foreign ministry spokesperson urged Japan to take concrete action.
In response to the Japanese side's extremely selfish and irresponsible wrong action, China and other parties at stake have the right and responsibility to take legitimate, reasonable and necessary precautionary measures to safeguard marine environment safety, food security and people's health.
In China, demand for seafood already appears to be falling, putting those in the fishing industry in a tough situation. Outraged Chinese citizens have been dialing the numbers of Japanese businesses and institutions to complain about the release. In the 4 days following the start of the discharge, more than 6,000 calls were made to the Tokyo Electric Power Company, while 220 calls were made to police stations across Japan. Japan has also reportedly made phone calls with complaints to the Chinese embassy and consulates, something the Chinese embassy says seriously disrupts the normal operation of their offices. Flights to Japan from China have decreased by a third over the past week, and more people with flights booked are demanding refunds. According to Japanese media outlets, Prime Minister Fumio Kishida will likely address the issue at the ASEAN meeting and G20 summit next month. There he is expected to engage in dialogue with participating countries and reiterate that the wastewater discharge meets international safety standards. Following North Korean leader Kim Jong-un's recent gang boss comments targeting the leaders of South Korea, the U.S. and Japan over their trilateral security cooperation, Washington reaffirms its commitment to engage in dialogue with the regime. Lee Seung-jae has more.
Earlier this week, North Korea's state-run Korean Central News Agency reported that its leader Kim Jong-un slammed the leaders of South Korea, the U.S. and Japan, calling them gang bosses for agreeing to regularize their joint military exercises. However, despite Kim's comments, Washington says it remains open to dialogue with Pyongyang. White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre said Tuesday that the U.S. has said on many occasions that they're open to dialogue with the reclusive state, and it remains true even now. Despite the U.S.'s openness to hold talks with Pyongyang, South Korean ambassador to the United States, Choi Yun-dong, said Tuesday during a forum hosted by the Washington-based Center for Strategic and International Studies that the opportunity for reopening dialogue with North Korea is not likely for the time being. Cho also reiterated South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol's stance that the continued provocations from Pyongyang will only strengthen the trilateral security cooperation between the three countries. Meanwhile, during the same event, the U.S. National Security Council Coordinator for Indo-Pacific Affairs, Kurt Campbell, highlighted the three allies' commitment to institutionalizing their three-way cooperation. Campbell stressed that what was seen in the Camp David summit was a sense of three equal, powerful, committed, determined nations meeting on equal terms, noting that no country is weaker or stronger in the alliance. However, he also said the trilateral cooperation cannot be future-proof, given the historical differences between South Korea and Japan being the major source of conflict between the two neighboring countries. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Special forces from South Korea and the U.S. have been out in the ocean for the past couple of days to master techniques for maritime infiltration. It's among the dozens of field training as part of the Ulchi Freedom Shield exercise. Our defense correspondent Choi Min-jung takes us there.
Special operations forces from South Korea and the U.S. head toward the shore on rubber boats, keeping their positions low. A number of the Special Forces personnel swim the rest of the way, cautiously making sure it's safe for the rest of the team to arrive. This is a glimpse of the combined training that Seoul and Washington do on a daily basis to infiltrate the enemy's base. Since last week in Yangyang County, Gangwon-do Province, around 100 personnel from South Korea's Army and U.S. Special Operations Command Korea have been conducting field training exercises to enhance skills in maritime infiltration. The training is part of the Ulchi Freedom Shield exercise, which runs until Thursday. This combined special operation is aimed at strengthening Seoul and Washington's interoperability.
Combined special operations capabilities could be further strengthened by mastering various tasks with the U.S. Special Operations Command Korea. We will continue to train and establish a perfect readiness so that we can accomplish any mission in case of emergency.
Seoul and Washington Special Forces master maritime infiltration techniques, including special strike operations and close combat techniques. The U.S. Captain Jay said the training is also focused on building the skills of leaders at every level, noting it as being the most important resource. He also underlined strong teamwork with South Korean forces.
For 70 years, American and Korean soldiers have stood shoulder to shoulder, dedicated to the defense of our homelands. Our ironclad alliance is integrated at every level, from the strategic to the tactical. I am proud to work with my Korean brothers. 같이 갑시다, 필승!
Going forward, Seoul and Washington Special Forces vow to prepare for every scenario on air, land, and sea.
U.S. Korea! We are together!
Choi Min-dang, Arirang News.
U.S. Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo says American companies are complaining that China has become uninvestable due to being too risky. The comments came on Tuesday as her delegation left for Shanghai after holding talks with officials in Beijing in an attempt to normalize economic ties with China. Raimondo says U.S. companies have pointed to fines, rates, and other measures that have made it too risky to do business there. She added that there had been no rationale given for Beijing's ban imposed earlier this year on American chipmaker Micron Technology, citing challenges American companies are now facing in China. Russian President Vladimir Putin has reportedly agreed to visit China for the Belt and Road Forum in October. Putin is set to make his first trip abroad since the International Criminal Court issued an arrest warrant over alleged war crimes in March related to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Citing unnamed sources, Bloomberg reported that Putin has accepted the invitation from Chinese President Xi Jinping to attend the event. It added Putin is only willing to visit countries where his security service can completely guarantee his safety. Kremlin spokesperson also told Reuters on Tuesday that the schedule for Russia and China's bilateral meetings at various levels, including at the highest level, are being worked out. Putin and Xi last met 7 months ago in Moscow.
Let's take a look at what's going on in the world now. In Russia, Wagner mercenary group chief Yevgeny Prigozhin was buried in a private funeral. The ceremony in his hometown of St. Petersburg on Tuesday was carried out without military honors. This despite Prigozhin being given Russia's highest military award, the Hero of Russia, for leading Wagner forces in Ukraine. Russian President Vladimir Putin also did not attend, with a Kremlin spokesperson saying that Putin's presence there was not envisaged. Prigozhin was among 10 people who died in a plane crash last Wednesday. Other prominent members of the Wagner group also died in the crash and were buried in separate funerals on the same day. The plane crash came 2 months after Prigozhin led a failed mutiny against the Russian army's top brass. Washington has suggested that Putin may be behind the fatal crash, but Putin denies any involvement. The U.S. state of Florida is bracing for what is being described as an unprecedented storm. Hurricane Idalia is set to make landfall on Wednesday morning local time. Evacuation orders have been issued for at least 28 of Florida's 67 counties. Over 5,000 members of the National Guard have also been put on standby. Forecasts warn of strong winds up to 30 centimeters of rain and storm surges of potentially more than 4 meters in some parts. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis warned that the Big Bend area, where the hurricane is expected to hit, hasn't seen a storm this size since the 1800s. Idalia is currently a Category 2 hurricane, but is expected to reach Category 3 before making landfall. Now, 1,300 schools have been destroyed and others damaged in Ukraine since Russia's invasion in February 2022. That's according to a UNICEF press release on Tuesday. It added that only a third of school-aged children in the country are going to classes in person. Meanwhile, over half of Ukrainian refugee children living across 7 host countries are not going to school due to language barriers, lack of school access, and burdened education systems. In Ukraine, many schools have suffered direct missile and artillery hits in the 18 months of war, while others have been shut down as a precautionary measure. UNICEF also noted that Ukrainian children have experienced 4 years of education disruption as the start of the war was preceded by the COVID-19 pandemic. And finally, in a world first, a live worm was pulled from the brain of an Australian woman. In an operation in June 2022, surgeons found the roundworm, which had grown to 8 centimeters long. It was removed from a 64-year-old from New South Wales, who had been suffering symptoms since January 2021. The roundworm is usually found in pythons. The patient likely became infected after collecting and eating wild grass. The case was documented in September's Emerging Infectious Diseases Journal. Matthew Ashley, Arirang News.
Good afternoon. Southern parts of the country have been dealing with downpours again. Rain could pound down 30 to 60 millimeters an hour through tomorrow. So heavy rain alerts will expand to more of the south as the day goes on today. In fact, coastal regions in Gyeongsangdo provinces and nearby areas will be hit the hardest with downpours. Jeju and Jeollado provinces could see up to 120 millimeters of rainfall into Thursday. Along with showers, there will be gusty winds with thunderstorms at times. Afternoon highs are similar to yesterday in central parts of the country under cloudy skies with light passing rain, but southern regions are having highs that are 1 to 4 degrees lower than yesterday. Sorry for those taking a late summer vacation. You need to take the weather into account and stay away from the water if you're traveling to the south and Jeju. It will rain through Sunday, but Jeju Island will see rain into next Monday. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
Next year's increased defense budget will set aside money to raise the wages of conscripted soldiers to 1.65 million Korean won, or roughly $1,200 for a sergeant. There will be $900 of monthly pay and $300 a month going into the lump sum that they get upon their discharge. In South Korea, all able-bodied men are required to serve in the military for 18 to 21 months to defend the country, which is still technically at war. And the government says it will better compensate young soldiers who often delay studies or life plans to do that service. That is all for today. Thanks for watching.